Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Stefano De Clara. I'm the head of Secretariat at ICAP, and I'll be hosting and moderating today's webinar. I wanted to, first of all, to say welcome to all of you, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us. This is a thank you and welcome on behalf of the broader ICAP Secretariat, but also on behalf of all the ICAP members and observers. As you probably know, the reason and the excuse to hold this webinar is the launch of ICAP's Emission Trading Worldwide Status Report 2024. But as we do every year, we also want to use, the launch of and the publication of our status report as an opportunity and as a chance to take stock of what the main ETS trends and developments are globally, and have a bit of a discussion and a reflection on that with some of the key policymakers behind the systems that we will be talking about. As a note of context on ICAP and on why we do this in the first place, ICAP stands for the International Carbon Action Partnership, and we are an international forum of more than 40 governments from different levels of governance, and also from different regions and geographies that get together under the auspices of ICAP to jointly work on the design, implementation, and advancement of emission trading systems as a way to put a price on greenhouse gas emissions, and as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over time. One of the things that we do, and one of the ICAP products that we like to call our flagship publication, is the ICAP Emission Trading Worldwide Status Report. It's a publication that we do every year. It provides the state of play for emission trading systems globally, and again, for us, but also we think for the broader carbon market community, it is every year an opportunity to take stock of where we are with the implementation of emission trading systems globally. Practically speaking, in the report that we launched yesterday, and that you will find on our website and on our social media channels, you will see and you will find a foreword by the ICAP co-chairs that sets the tone for the broader report and for the overall context in which emission trading systems are implemented. This year we are also doing things a bit differently in a couple of respects. So first of all, we have a new and extended executive summary where we outline what we think are the most interesting trends and outlook for emission trading globally. So this goes beyond the traditional fact sheets, which are typically the bulk of the report, and provides a bit of a narrative on what we think that stands out for us when we reflect on where we are with the ETS design and implementation. Next to that, and as you always do, you will find infographics that capture in a visual way some of the key developments that we are observing. You will also find the fact sheets that contain detailed information on every single emission trading system in force, under development, or being considered worldwide. And the second relatively big change that we implemented this year is that we basically took a bit of a broader look at the emission trading landscape. And for the first time, we are consistently including within the scope of the report a wider range of emission trading systems. This mainly has to do with forms of intensity-based emissions trading, as well as other types of ETS that were not fully captured in the report before. And we'll go into this a bit later, but this pretty much captures the evolving emission trading landscape that we are seeing. As a note of context and as a way to contextualize what we cover in the report, I mean, it still is fully focused on emission trading systems, which are, as you know, just a subset or a slice of the overall carbon pricing landscape. But historically, the report tended to focus on cap and trade systems, so emission trading systems with absolute caps. That gradually changed over time, most notably with the inclusion of the Chinese national ETS, which is intensity based in nature. And as we started to see more and more intensity-based or hybrid forms of emission trading systems cropping up around the world, we decided to pause for a second, take stock, and reassess the what we should include in our report. And as a result, from this year, we include all forms of emission trading systems. So still a subset of the overall carbon pricing landscape, but we will be consistent in including all forms of absolute cap as well as intensity-based cap emission trading systems, and we'll see what that means in a second. Also, as a note of context, other forms of carbon pricing will remain outside of the coverage of the status report, and they're also pretty much outside of the core mandate that ICAP has, because ICAP is a partnership tasked to work on compliance emission trading systems. So the report still does not focus on carbon taxes and on voluntary carbon markets and on compliance offsetting schemes such as CORSIA. Our focus still lies on emission trading systems, even though it's a bit broader this time around and going forward. In terms of what we have in store for today, I'll very soon stop talking and we'll dive into the substance of the webinar. I'll be giving the floor to my colleagues Anastasia and Lewis in a second, and they will take us through a presentation of what we think are the key highlights from this year's report. So the key things that stood out for us in terms of where we are with ETS design and implementation. And after that, we move to a panel discussion. I'll be presenting my panelists a bit later on in the event, but we'll be hearing from policymakers and market practitioners from Europe, New Zealand, China, and Turkey. After we are done with the first initial round of moderated discussion, we will open the floor to discussion with all of you as attendees, and we will do that through the Q&A function of the webinar. So as we go through our presentation and as we go through the panel discussion, you can already put in questions in the Q&A box, and I will be putting those questions to the panel as soon as we're done with the moderated discussion. We'll make sure to reserve at least roughly 20 minutes for Q&A towards the end of the webinar. I believe that's it. Just as a final quick note of housekeeping, as this is something that always comes up, we will be posting the recording of the webinar on our website, so you will be able to find it together with the slides that we'll be using today, and obviously pretty much everything that will be discussed today and everything that will be shown today will be available either in the report itself or more broadly on the ICAP website. So you'll be able to access those materials afterwards. With that, I think I'll pause it here, and I'll give the floor to my colleague Anastasia to start diving into the key highlights from this year's report. And again, thank you to all of you for joining us today. Anastasia, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefano, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to our status report together with my colleague Lewis. For those of you who have already delved into our report yesterday or today, you'll have noticed that there's much to explore in this year's edition. And I would like to start with an overview of the main messages of our report that you can find in more details in our newly introduced Trends and Outlook section. To us, there are 4 key messages. First, more and more governments worldwide are choosing to adopt ETSs, but challenges remain. We found that emerging economies are increasingly adopting ETSs. For example, Indonesia has taken a significant step forward by recently launching an ETS focused on the power generation sector. Other countries like India and Brazil are also making important progress in advancing their own ETS frameworks. Yet, it is not just emerging economies that are embracing this shift. Developed economies are also making strides. For instance, Canada and the European Union are currently in the planning stages for launching new systems. Our second message is that innovative system designs are emerging. The design and development of new ETSs is giving rise to a new generation of more hybrid and more innovative systems, sometimes deviating from the traditional cap-and-trade blueprint. We are, for example, observing a surge of intensity-based emissions trading systems like the Chinese national ETS. And as a result, we've decided to expand the scope of our report to include these additional systems in this year's report, as Stefano mentioned earlier on. Coming to our third message, established ETSs are improving, expanding, and aligning with net zero targets. So governments worldwide are not only focusing on introducing new ETSs, they're also improving, enhancing existing ones to align with the ambitious objective of achieving net zero emissions by the middle of the century. Examples abound. They include California, Quebec, the UK, South Korea, and many more, where efforts are underway to refine and to expand the ETS frameworks. Our final message is that the prices are holding, guaranteeing another year of record revenues. There's a combination of, on the one hand, consistently high price levels across various systems, and on the other hand, a growing adoption of auctioning as a means of allocation that has resulted in yet another record-breaking year for auction revenue collection. And my colleague Luis, in the second part of our presentation, will delve into more details on revenue figures. So coming to our next slide, this is a newly introduced infographic where we highlight the key numbers of our status report. Let's begin with coverage. There are currently 36 emission trading systems in force, covering 9.9 gigatons of CO2 emissions. This represents over 18% of global GHG emissions. Moving on to revenue highlights. In 2023 alone, these systems have generated $74 billion. This accounts for almost a quarter of all revenues generated since 2007, totaling $303 billion. Regarding development progress around the world, there are currently 14 ETSs under development and another 8 more under consideration. And our final figure, nearly 1 out of 3 of the global population lives under an ETS in force. Additionally, jurisdictions making up 58% of global GDP are actively engaged in emissions trading initiatives. So let's now explore our map, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It provides us with an overview of the current landscape of ETS systems across the world. And there is a lot of information to delve into here on this slide, and I could spend hours here. But I'd like to offer you a concise overview of some of the most important developments that have unfolded over the past 12 months. And I would like to start with Europe. It has been a very eventful year for climate policy in the European Union. The EU ETS is the oldest and the largest ETS in terms of trading volume and in terms of value. In the first half of 2023, the EU implemented very important reforms to the framework. These reforms not only increased ambition, but also expanded the scope of the EU ETS to include the maritime sector. And additionally, as some of you will already be aware of, a new ETS will soon be introduced for buildings, road transport, and other sectors. And yeah, I'm very pleased to have Ruben here today in our panel, who will provide us with further insights into the EU developments. Moving a bit farther north to the UK, the UK ETS commenced operation in 2021 following UK's departure from the EU. And last year, a series of reforms were implemented to align the scheme with the UK's long-term emissions objectives. The government plans to extend the scheme to include new sectors, such as, for example, the maritime sector or waste incineration. And our last region that I would like to cover, our last country I would like to cover in this region today is Turkey. Has been a very important year for Turkey. Turkey has taken notable steps towards establishing an ETS. The government is currently drafting a climate law to define crucial ETS features, and they are planning to initiate activities on the Partnership for Market Implementation later this year. And yeah, we're very pleased to welcome Okan today, who will be able to provide us with more details later on. Moving now to the right of the map to the Asia-Pacific region, one of the focus areas of today's webinar. It has been a very busy year in the Asia-Pacific, and I would like to highlight 4 jurisdictions, namely China, New Zealand, India, and Japan. Starting with China. China launched a highly anticipated offset scheme at the end of 2023, creating a new market for domestic emissions reduction projects. Additionally, the government recently published a new ETS regulation that significantly increases penalties for non-compliance and market manipulation. And I'm sure that Hong Ming will be able to share more information on this later in our webinar. I'd like now to move on to New Zealand. In 2023, we witnessed further advancements in the developments of the New Zealand ETS. Adjustments were made to the system to align the ICAP trajectory with New Zealand's net zero targets. Additionally, the October elections ushered in a change of government, which announced its intention to advance pricing for agriculture emissions by no later than 2030. And it is great to have Amira with us today for further details later on. In the same region, India is actively developing its own carbon market. The compliance scheme is set to be introduced to a phased transition starting in 2024. And lastly, Japan is combining various carbon pricing instruments to achieve its net zero by 2050, and recently launched a voluntary baseline and credit system called GX ETS. Japan plans to make the system mandatory in the coming years. I would like to close this review with the Americas. It is not the focus area of today's session, but there have been very interesting developments in this region too. And I would like to quickly highlight 4 systems. Starting with Canada Federal. In 2023, the federal government amended its federal OBPS to enhance the system's stringency. Furthermore, in December, Canada announced the development of a federal cap-and-trade system for the oil and gas sector. Moving on to Washington. The Cap and Invest program completed its first year in 2023, and currently they are exploring the possibility of linking with the joint California-Quebec market. Then come California and Quebec, of course. The 2 jurisdictions have over a decade of operational experience and are considering revisions and amendments to their programs set to be implemented throughout 2024. And additionally, in 2024, California and Quebec will celebrate their 10th anniversary of being linked together. Coming to the final jurisdiction of today's presentation that I would like to highlight, namely Brazil. It has been a very important year for Brazil. Brazil is contemplating a new bill to initiate its own ETS. And this bill will establish the governance framework and define the legal foundation for obligations by covered entities. I leave it at that for now, but obviously please feel free to delve into our report available on our website for all the details on the jurisdictions over the world. And we'll now dig a bit deeper into the details, and for this I'm pleased to pass the floor to my colleague Lewis.
Cool, thanks Anastasia. I'm very happy to be here today for the webinar for my home region of Asia Pacific. It's a real treat. So yeah, great to have you all here. So we'll start with the global expansion of ETS. This infographic really talks to the spread of trading schemes around the world and the trends in overall coverage. So things really got started in 2005 with the EU ETS, which covered about 5% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And since then, you can see there have been regular additions of schemes almost every year, with a major step up in coverage when the China National Scheme came into force in 2021. So that's the big purple step that you can see there. And today, schemes cover a total of about 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which I think Anastasia also mentioned earlier. You can see that over the last 4 years or so, despite new schemes coming online, and there are a lot there, the trend in coverage is relatively flat and even dipped in 2024. And this really shows the interaction between declining caps and schemes on one hand and adding new schemes to the mix in the other. And that's really the most obvious in the dark blue block for Europe at the bottom of that plot. You can see that decreasing as time goes on. And looking to the future, signs are we'll continue to see more schemes added to this plot. The ones that Anastasia mentioned already around Brazil, Turkey, which Okan will talk about a bit later on. Ukraine, India, and Japan, and a number of states in the US have also got plans for new schemes. So I'll ask Stefano to move us on to the next slide. So here we talk about the sectoral coverage of the schemes that are in force around the world. And in this infographic, each color represents a sector. So the two blue donuts in the middle represent the energy and industry sectors, and they're the most commonly covered. Moving out from there, the next two sectors next two most common sectors are buildings and transport. And they're covered by around a third of the schemes presented here. From there, there's a much more there's a diverse range of approaches. For example, we've got 4 schemes that cover emissions from waste, and only lonely old New Zealand out there is covering forestry. And conspicuously absent from this plot, for the time being anyway, is biogenic emissions from agriculture. No scheme around the world covers that yet, but I know there are ambitions for the New Zealand scheme to do that. We're also seeing jurisdictions look to expand the scope of their schemes. Germany and Austria have launched an ETS for fuels. The EU ETS has brought in maritime transport. And when it comes into effect, the EU ETS 2 will cover road transport and buildings. I'm sure Ruben will give us more detail on that when he speaks later. As well as the variation in sectoral coverage, there's also a range of approaches, or there is also a range of the proportion of emissions that are covered and the point of regulation. When it comes to coverage, it really ranges from about 10% for some of the North American schemes, all the way up to a whopping 90% for Korea. And then coming to the point of regulation, some schemes are downstream only, like the EU ETS. Others are upstream only, like Germany. And others have a mixed approach, like the Californian and Quebec schemes. So then I'll move us on to allowance price developments. Thanks, Stefano. So on the top left here, you can see the prices in USD across 2023. And you can see really it's pretty hard to pick a kind of unifying trend here. I think if you're being really brave, you might say kind of broadly stable. But I think you'd have to be pretty brave to do that. If we look at some particular examples, prices in the EU and UK hit highs around February in 2023 and then softened over the rest of the year. On the other hand, in the North American systems, such as that in place in California, Quebec, and the RGGI, showed steady overall price gains throughout the year. So then we'll move on to auctioning revenues. So for those schemes that utilize auctioning, those prices that we talked about translate into revenue. And last year saw the highest ever annual revenue collected by ETSs around the world at just over $74 billion US, up from 63 billion in 2022. So a really significant increase there. And this is being driven by a combination of relatively high prices in some systems and the increasing use of auctioning as an allocation method. And it follows a really strong upward trend we've seen since 2020. You can see those big steps up that we've got over the last sort of 4 years or so. In terms of those revenues, sorry, Stefano, we'll go back to the other one. In terms of those revenues, Europe really accounts for the lion's share. In the pie graph there, you can see the EU is in the dark blue. Germany is the next largest in the lighter purple, and the UK in the darker purple. These schemes are all relatively large, feature extensive use of auctioning, and have seen relatively high emissions allocation prices, allowance prices recently. And in general, we're seeing a trend towards more use of auction-based allocation methods compared to free allocation in the design of new systems. The US state of Washington, which Anastasia mentioned earlier, adopted an auction-based allocation method from the outset, and reinvestment of auctioning proceeds is so central to that scheme that it's labeled as cap and invest instead of cap and trade. So I'll move on to the next slide. So obviously, with so much money being generated by these schemes, the next obvious question is how that money is being used. And this year, we really sought to dig into this theme and investigate how jurisdictions earmark funds or not. And this is really important at the moment, as in general, we're seeing governments needing to take careful decisions about where they allocate resources and balance their short-term priorities that support acceptance of schemes like the cost of living and inflation against the crucial long-term challenges that are faced around the world, like climate change. There's a range of approaches that we see to the earmarking of funds gathered by emissions trading schemes, and they're really clustered around these 5 main themes. We've got the general budget up the top there in the kind of golden yellow, assistance to individuals, households, and businesses in the form of things like climate grants, climate mitigation activities, low carbon innovation, and then a sort of basket of other objectives, such as education and health. So this infographic here is a stylized Venn diagram. And if a jurisdiction appears in a given peanut, it means that that category applies. So if a jurisdiction is closer to the middle, it means more of those categories apply, and if it's closer to the outside, it means less. And you can see we've got a cluster of jurisdictions up the top, for whom the revenues collected go into the general budget. And this obviously gives those governments maximum flexibility in how those revenues are used. And here we can see New Zealand, the UK, Switzerland, and a cluster of the Chinese schemes. Many schemes also dedicate funding to climate mitigation activities in some form or another. That's the green peanut there. And low carbon innovation is also really well represented in the dark orange. Looking to the future, I don't think we'd be surprised if we saw more ETS funds being earmarked for particular uses, particularly as we see the demand for responses to distributional impacts increase, and things like maintaining public support for schemes become more pressing. So that's my sort of quick tour through some of our key infographics. I'll hand you back to Stefano now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you also, Anastasia, for the great overview and for taking us through the key findings of the status report. We're about to dive into the panel discussion in a second. Before we do that, I also wanted to reiterate that everything that we presented, as well as much more information, data, and insights on all things emissions trading, can be found on the ICAP website, and more broadly in the ICAP knowledge sharing offering. A couple of things that I wanted to mention is that, I mean, as I said already, the report is already on our website and on our social media channels, so feel free to check it out after the webinar. As always, you will also be able to access the same information that you find in the report through the interactive ETS map on our website, so that is already up to date with the latest information for all of the systems covered. I also wanted to mention that you will be able to find the allowance prices on APE, on the allowance price explorer, that is also on our website. We are also about to launch a newly developed version of 8. It will come online in the coming weeks and towards the beginning of next month. But once it will be online on the new 8, you'll be able to find more data covering both primary and secondary market data for an additional number of systems compared to what we have featured now. It will also be much more user-friendly and interactive than the current 8. And most notably, alongside allowance price data, you will also be able to find data related to the revenues and to the auction revenues that different systems collect. So pretty much along the same lines of the graph that Lewis presented earlier. So all of that will be available in a few weeks, and keep an eye out for announcements around that. Another products that we're about to launch is the first ever ICAP podcast, which will come online next week. So also keep an eye out on that one. As a podcast, it will be an opportunity to dive into some key topics and aspects related to ETS design and implementation. We are starting the very first episode with a bit of a recap on the ICAP status report. But then we are planning to launch roughly one episode every month, and each episode will focus either on a different topic or on a different system, featuring key experts from the carbon market landscape. So keep an eye out for that one as well. More announcements will come through our usual channels. With that, and ending the quick note of self-promotion, we'll move on to the panel discussion. And we are really lucky to have an esteemed set of panelists, which will help us dissect some of the key trends that we just discussed. So we wanted to invite speakers from the key jurisdictions that showed interesting developments last year. And I also wanted to say welcome to our panelists. We have Ruben Vermeeren, Deputy Head of the Unit for Carbon Markets and Clean Mobility in DG Clima at the European Commission. Amira Clayton, who is a Senior Policy Analyst at the Ministry for Environment in New Zealand. Hongming Liu, who is Director for Carbon Markets at the Environmental Defense Fund in China. And Okan Ugurlu, Carbon Pricing Expert at the Directorate of Climate Change in Turkey. So first of all, thank you to all of you for joining us. I'll stop sharing the presentation so we can see our ties and our faces a bit more clearly. And as we often do, we're always keen to hear from policymakers and market practitioners such as yourself what you make of basically what Anastasia and Lewis just presented, and what stood out for you out of what we described in terms of the state of play for ETS globally. So I would like to do a really quick first round of panel discussion, taking your reactions on the report, and then I'll come back shortly for a second round, asking to share a bit more context and updates on your systems. But in terms of reactions, and starting with Ruben, what stood out for you, or is there anything that you would like to highlight?
Thank you very much, Stefano. And I lost all visuals on my screen, so it's black for me. I don't know if you can hear me or see me. It would be great if you could confirm that.
We can hear you and see you fine.
Okay, perfect. That's good news. So first of all, big congratulations on this status report. I think it's number 11. And it's a very impressive tool with great visuals and very useful. I think I use it at least a couple of times per week, especially now that we are stepping up in the Commission our international cooperation and outreach with third countries. It's a great tool to quickly see where jurisdictions are at in their development of the ETS. Three things I think that struck me most. First of all, the size of the report. You sent me a sneak preview. I thought I'd quickly print it, but it was 250 pages, so I thought maybe better not to print. And I compared it this morning with the first report, and it had 63 pages, and there were only 8 ETSs in the world. So bigger reports are not always better, but I think in this case they are. It means more ETSs. It means better graphs. I liked the new one you had on the auction revenues. I have some comments on it, but we can discuss later. But more ETSs, of course, means more climate action. And I think that is the positive message, especially for us now in the Commission. I think in the 2040 discussions that are very topical now in Brussels, there is an increased awareness that we represent only 7% of global emissions. And this percentage goes down rapidly as we try to decarbonize quickly. But no matter how quickly and how well we do it, we are only bringing ourselves from 7 to 0, and there's 93% of emissions out there. And so we are stepping up our international outreach. We're setting up a new task force. There will be 10 people working there full time. So that's for us at least, that's a lot. And that means that we can really intensify our cooperation, and then a tool such as this helps to identify countries and see where they are at. Second point, the categories under development and under consideration. It would be good or would be interesting to have a bit more assessment of how promising these developments are, and also looking backwards how quickly jurisdictions graduate from one category to the next. Have there been great pupils who in 1 year went from under consideration to under development to then in the next year in operation? That would be good to see. Another thing in the category that says that they are operational. One thing that is missing, and I understand the reason why, is an idea of how well these schemes are functioning. Often we get questions, for example, why is this Mexico ETS not taking off? What is that little Montenegro system doing there? So they look as if they're operational, but you hear very little from them. And the status report, of course, stays very factual. Just says this is the coverage, this is the objective, but then there's nothing, for example, to say these are the challenges that the system is struggling with, or these are the design elements that the jurisdiction is trying to improve. There will be a second comment. Third comment, new forms of ETS, as you are saying. You see more hybrid systems, more intensity-based systems. Of course, there's no one-size-fits-all, and it's great that we have them in the report. I actually thought that intensity-based systems were there already. I recall seeing China always there, for example, and should be there. But maybe a word of warning, or a piece of learning that we have done in the ETS is that a binding cap that is declining, and that is very clear for everybody, is really the key feature. I think it's the feature that we are most happy with in our ETS, because that is the one that creates the price signal, and that is the one that creates the business case for investments in technologies that go beyond incremental emission reductions, that really are in breakthrough technologies. So ETSs can play a role in triggering those investments, and we know we need them if we want industrial decarbonization, which I think is the next big challenge. But I'm going over time, so I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ruben, and as always, really interesting observations. I'll take up your offer to discuss new dimensions and metrics that we could be looking at, and also really good point on on these new and different forms of emission trading systems. As we discussed, I mean, we started to include them consistently as of this year. I mean, as you pointed out, the Chinese system was already there, but we wanted to rationalize a bit the coverage and understand whether we were really capturing all the systems that we needed to capture. And as a result, we've ended up including a few additional ones this year. That is mainly the reformed safeguard mechanism in Australia, in Australia and the output-based pricing systems in place at the federal and at the provincial level in Canada. Yeah, I mean, also good point on understanding of on the need to understand whether these systems can actually easily be aligned with long-term binding targets, and perhaps we could later on in the discussion we could poke Hongmin on the experiences made in China with an intensity-based cap, and also Okan on the current thinking in Turkey for what concerns cap setting. But we'll save that for later on in the panel discussion. I want to go to Amira next, also in recognition of the late hour for you in New Zealand. Can I also quickly ask you what you found interesting out of the presentation and out of the report?
Yes. Ina mana, ina reo, tēnā koutou katoa. It's great to be here on the panel. Thank you for having me. And yeah, congratulations on the launch of the latest status report. For me, similar to my colleague Ruben, it's really encouraging to see the growing development of ETSs around the world. The map showing how much blue and how much green there is a really encouraging picture of this. And I think for me, what that means is the potential of a growing group of experts to share experiences and lessons like through this forum, which is quite an exciting prospect. I also, again, to echo Ruben's reflections, that emerging innovative emissions pricing systems that depart from the typical cap and trade model. That's also really very interesting. The New Zealand emissions trading scheme has changed a lot over the course of its lifetime, and the developments of these new ETSs that we see emerging, and then also improvements to existing ETSs will be of great interest to New Zealand, particularly as New Zealand sort of throughout the course of its lifetime has continued to monitor the performance of our ETS. Just short and sweet for me.
Thank you, and thanks for your remarks. And you're right. I mean, the emergence of more and more systems every year is also effectively, expanding the community of policy experts and market practitioners. So, it will hopefully have a snowball effect on creating more and more capacity as we go by. And obviously, as ICAP, we are also looking forward to welcoming new jurisdictions in our membership, but also we're also looking forward to working with additional numbers of jurisdictions and regions in helping them setting up new systems. And on that, we're also pretty much looking forward to the launch of the task force that Ruben just described, as it really goes hand in hand with our objectives here at ICAP. But again, we can come back to that later, as I'm also already seeing questions on the task force in the Q&A. I want to go to Hongmin next and ask again, same question, what did you find interesting out of this year's takeaways?
Hi, Stefano. Thank you for having me. And again, also congratulations on this release, launching of this report, and also this exciting events. I think for me, this report is really a useful reference and material for understanding all the international landscapes of the ETS. And I really want to also highlight when you were doing the PPT, there was the broader range of the ETS, which is really showing the evolvements of all the emission trading system, which is touching on the crediting or the voluntary markets and offsetting programs, and also intensity-based cap. Definitely China is on that, and also versus the absolute cap. I think this is all the the involvement of the current ETS system, and also will be really the success of the ETS approach, which is no one is fits for all. So every country has its own characteristic and also has its own ETS system. I think also I want to highlight is maybe for future and also for the reader of this report, we can compare the current version with the prior versions. Like when we're reading the 2021, 2022 to 2024, we can really see the expansion, the involvement and development of the ETS worldwide, and also what's the definition for the modernized ETS, and also which is in line for the you have to see the Paris Agreement, and also in line with every country's NDC. So also I think this is touch on the China part. I think in this report, I mean, your report really including a lot of details of the latest development of China's ETS, which is like the total coverage of the emission amounts, and also what's the details of the design of the system. So also it's in line with the development in the Northeast Asia. So I'm also looking forward to the next, I mean, the year report of the next one too. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm sure the ICAP team is not, looking forward to engaging in the report production process just yet, but we'll get there in a few months, and we're also excited to see what comes next. I want to go to Håkan quickly with yet again the same question. What did you find interesting out of the latest developments in the ETS space?
Okay, thank you, Stefano. And firstly, allow me to express my respects to all participants on behalf of my institution, Turkish Directorate of Climate Change. And Stefano, please feel free to interrupt me if I exceed the time limits. Well, actually, while Lewis presenting the figures, I was thinking where to put Turkey in the figures. And well, actually, with around 250 million tons emissions, it will contribute to the coverage of global emission trading systems. And also in the revenue uses, we are planning to use our revenues for climate mitigation and low carbon innovations. So, well, actually, it will contribute a lot, and I think in the next status report we will see it. And before I will highlight Ruben's suggestions, well, it sounds good to have more info on countries, because some concepts we have some Paris aligned carbon markets, so it would be a good thing to grade some ETS or giving more info, but maybe in some aspects it can be discouraging. I don't know, but the suggestion is interesting. For the status report, well, firstly, ICAP publications are always reference sources for us. And as an ICAP alumni, I benefited in my professional career. Also as country, some of my seniors are also ICAP alumni. So I think it won't be false to say that there is an institutional collaboration between our department and ICAP. So for the intensity-based systems or other types of ETS, for us, it is important to see such examples of carbon pricing. As you know, cap determining is one of the crucial aspects of the job because it will define your carbon budget. However, distribution of a cap to the sectors or the companies, let's say installations, is another crucial aspect. And having a flexible cap may be more compatible with some NDCs, maybe like China's or some other targets. So I think it is good to have in the report, and it is good for us to examine them. And also I want to suggest that well, I'm taking my notes. Actually, I read the report. Well, the report emphasizes the year 2023 as the hottest year in terms of climate change, and it says 1.5 Celsius degree threshold has been crossed. For that, I can say that conditions in the Turkish homeland confirms this trend, which means that, well, I did not make a survey, but for sure, urgency of climate action becomes more and more visible, unfortunately, in Turkey too. So it also means that the policy acceptance levels should have been rising in terms of climate action here in Turkey. So in my opinion, this is an important aspect, not only for carbon pricing mechanisms, but also for all mitigation efforts. As years pass and the schedules for the net zero targets tighten, 2050 for EU, 2053 for Turkey, 2060 for China, there is no much time. So policy acceptance of the public opinion will be more and more important. And inevitably, we will be talking more and more on the trade-offs together with the new opportunities, new paths, new supportive mechanisms, and hopefully new ecosystems on the low carbon economics. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Okan, and thanks for the kind words about ICAP. But thank you also for putting this discussion in the context of the urgency of the fight against climate change. It's always a stark and good reminder of why we're here talking about this in the first place. I want to come back to the panel again for another round of discussion, and this time I would like to start from Ruben again and ask each one of you to share a few highlights from your jurisdiction and your system. And again, starting from Ruben and from the EU that showed quite a lot of interesting developments over the last 12 months or so. So Ruben, over to you.
Thank you, Stefano. Yes, I would fully agree with that statement. I think 2023 was a big year for us, mainly for two reasons: a major revision entering into force that we're still implementing, and a record drop in emissions. So I will expand a bit on each of those. In terms of the revision, what we did in 2023 was conclude the legislative process of implementing the Fit for 55 package for the ETS. What did that mean? We had a political target of 55% EU-wide, economy-wide emission reductions to be achieved by 2030, and that then needed to be translated into an ETS contribution. That contribution is 62%, and that means that our cap will have to decline to 62%, and that means a much steeper decline that we will have in the coming years. It's really a little sprint that we need to do to catch up and to get in line with the 2050 climate neutrality target. So we have concluded that, and I think we are now on track indeed. But of course, the revision became much broader. And as other practitioners will know, if you start playing with the cap, or tweaking the cap, then all other building blocks of the ETS start moving. And so we also had to look at reallocation, at market stability, at market oversight, etc. On top of that, as part of the homework that we got from our president under the Green Deal, we had to implement a number of new elements. So the maritime sector had to be integrated into the ETS. A new ETS2 had to be set up for buildings and road transport. And that came together with a social climate fund to manage the impacts that the ETS2 would have on vulnerable groups. And also the CBAM, of course, plays an important role in that revision. We were not in the lead as Klima there, but it did have an impact on our free allocation and carbon leakage policy in the ETS directive. Some of these new elements are being phased in. Maritime is gradually being phased in. CBAM is in its transitional phase. The Social Climate Fund will start in 2026, so we're still working a lot on the implementation. And ETS2 will start in 2027. So implementation is really still in 2023, but still in 24 and also 25, the main thrust of our work. We're updating monitoring rules, reporting rules, reallocation rules, guidance for operators. The ETS is a decentralized system, so a lot of work is done by the member states and by the national emissions authorities. We're trying to help them with support instruments, with technical assistance, but this simply takes time. So the second point is the emission trends. 2023 was a big year also in emission reductions. I think we published the figures last week or the week before. For those who have not seen them, emissions reduced in 2023 by 15.5% compared to 2022. That's an amazing figure. 15.5%. The power sector alone reduced emissions by 24% year on year. Of course, we know that 2022 was a special year in which everything went wrong that could go wrong. And in 2023, all of a sudden, everything started helping, the weather, etc. So we're having much less coal, much more renewables. But we also see improved energy efficiency, including in industry. So this is really a good story, and it allowed us to make a big step towards that 62% target that I talked about. That seemed very ambitious, and that is very ambitious, but we are now at -47. And so it seems a lot more feasible to achieve those additional 15% in the coming 6 years until the end of the decade. Although we are fully aware that, of course, the low-hanging fruit is now being cut quickly. Now the difficult part starts. And I think looking forward, maybe I'll close with that. Indeed, as the power sector decarbonizes rapidly, the focus will shift to industry. 2023 was also the starting shot of thinking about the 2040 target. We published a communication on that with a recommendation of a 90% target for 2040, and that would, of course, again require a very significant contribution from the ETS sectors, which are now many more sectors than before. 75% of EU emissions will be covered by emissions trading as of 2027. And so moving from -62 to maybe -90, 95, who knows where we will end up. Wherever we end up, it will be a major transformation. And that is also the reason why we have to look outside the borders of the EU, because these implications are, of course, impacting also the competitiveness of our industries. I think I'll keep it with that. I'm aware I did not answer any of the questions in the Q&A. Maybe we can do it later. If you want to do it now, that's also fine.
Thanks, Ruben. And yeah, we come to the Q&A in a few minutes. And I also wanted to say congratulations to you and all the colleagues at DG Clima for pushing ahead such a comprehensive reform package. It was quite an undertaking, and it's nice to see that the next phase for the EU ETS is really shaping up. And as Ruben was saying, I mean, the EU, as part of this push, was quite busy also on expanding the coverage of the existing system, as well as launching a new one that will cover additional sectors. I wanted to go to Amira now as someone from a system from the New Zealand ETS, which started out with a relatively broad coverage at the outset, and it is a system that, as Lewis was pointing out, basically covers all sectors except for biogenic emissions from agriculture. And I wanted to ask you, how are things going and where things are at in the New Zealand ETS?
Thank you, Stefano. So, yes, 2023, also an interesting year. As you and Lewis and Anastasia mentioned, we had an election in October of 2023. So we now have a new government. This government's committed to New Zealand's climate change budgets and targets, and has indicated that it sees the New Zealand ETS as the main tool for meeting those targets. And so this may mean that we see our ETS playing a growing role in the government's efforts to meet our targets and achieving those. So a key focus of the government for the ETS is supporting market confidence in the ETS. There are some policy developments, as was mentioned earlier on in the presentation. The New Zealand ETS has broad coverage, but that's half of New Zealand's emissions that are covered by the ETS, well, almost half, and then around the other half is agricultural emissions, which are outside of the ETS. So this government has committed to pricing agricultural emissions and doing that by no later than 2030, but as Anastasia had mentioned before. And another sort of key development in 2023, and then also kind of following the election. So the previous government started reviewing the New Zealand ETS in the middle of 2023, and some of the options proposed would have impacted forestry in the ETS. So as Lewis pointed out, New Zealand is lonely in its inclusion of forestry in the ETS. So foresters can earn a unit for every tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent captured from the atmosphere. So carbon dioxide captured from the atmosphere. And this government closed that review at the end of 2023. A quick update on the auctions. So it was an interesting year for auctions. So the major reform in 2020 included the introduction of government auctions, and that's led to some interesting developments in the ETS market since then over the kind of following years. In 2023, none of the 4 auctions cleared, so meaning no units were sold at auction. And New Zealand's regulations mean that units not sold in 1 year are then not available for sale in a subsequent auction in the subsequent year. We had our first auction of 2024 in March, and that resulted in a partial clearance. So that means that some of the units were sold. Looking to the near future, ministers have sought advice on how to influence where trees are planted and using the ETS in order to do that. So by limiting forestry on land that's considered more suitable from entering into the ETS. So this would be new registrations. But on a sort of, in terms of bigger picture, so this year the government will present and then finalise its plan for meeting New Zealand's second emissions budget. So this includes consideration of the Climate Change Commission's, New Zealand's Climate Change Commission's advice on what that plan should involve. So for those of you who aren't aware, the Climate Change Commission was established to provide independent and evidence-based advice to the government on climate change matters. I might even have some of my colleagues on the call, so if they're here, just want to acknowledge you and the work that you do. And so that process for the government kind of finalising its plan will also include public consultation in the middle of this year. And so this is what's known as an emissions reduction plan. And as part of this process, the government will be making decisions about the role of emissions pricing in that plan and for meeting our longer term targets. So some key decisions up ahead that'll set us up for the near and longer term future. Thank you.
Thank you for the great overview. And I want to move to Hongbin next, and asking you to share a few quick updates on from China and on progress with the implementation of the national Chinese ETS. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I would like to say first for the China National ETS and also the offsetting program or the voluntary carbon market is also really crucial for the 2023 because all the work has been done during last year, and you can see there's a lot of the announcement for the legislation, the management decree of the national ETS, and also the launching of the trading of the voluntary carbon market. So for now, the China national ETS, which is the compliance market, and the China voluntary emission reduction market, which is well known as the CCER, together have been formed the China's carbon market system. So I would like to touch a little bit of details of the status and the development of the national ETS, the compliance market first. The China's national ETS compliance market has been completed two compliance cycle, which is the first is the 2019 and the 2020, the second is 2021 and the 2022. But by the end of the second compliance period, the annual coverage of the emissions, it's about 5.1 billion tons of CO2, and inclusion of more than 2,200 key emission entities. And the accumulated trading volume of the allowances in the national ETS was about 440 million tons, which is with the accumulated trading volume about 24.92 billion yuan RMB. And comparison of the trading volume of the second compliance period, it's increased by 90% compared with the first compliance cycle. And the trading value has increased about 98%. The carbon price, the allowances price was on the second market was rise from 48 per 10 48 RMB per 10 to about 80 per RMB per 10. This is about 66% increase. And also we can see active participating on the trading activities in the second compliance cycle. And also for the management decree, I want to highlight it. We can see this was the Chinese Premier Li Qiang was signed this state council level decree, which is the current highest level of the regulation that managing the China national ETS, which will be enforced on the 1st of May this year. And this is providing the legal framework of the operation of China national ETS and actually improving the stringent penalties for the falsification of carbon emission data and holding both the organization and the individuals involved accountable, which is including like the third-party verifications and the emission entities. And also, I would like the penalties are actually increased from the previous several thousand RMB to over millions RMB of the penalty if there's any cases of data falsification or unreliable issues happened. The other progress we can see for this year is after during the National People's Congress, Premier Li Qiang explicitly pointed that it will accelerate the expansion of the national ETS in 2024, which also will enhance the capability of the carbon emission accounting and verification. Also, China will, the first time mentioned, China is planning to establish the carbon footprint management system in the report of the government, the work plan. And also, actually, the MEE is also doing the work for the expansion of the carbon market, the carbon market expansion. They're doing they have different sectoral working groups to doing the research on the feasibility of the expansion and to assess and validate the allowance methodologies and trying to produce or trying to draft the accounting reporting methodologies guidelines of the accounting requirements. And trying to identify the more feasible implementation paths for expanding the sector expansion. And also, actually, last month and this month, we can see the MEE, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment, actually released the MRV guidelines for the aluminum sector and the cement sector, which indicates the expansion, the determination of the sector expansion towards those sectors. And also we can see there's the consideration of utilizing the green electricity for those sectors. This is the highlights for the national ETS. And also I want to say a little bit more about the CCR program. On the January 22nd, the Vice Premier Ding Xuexiang was announced the launch of the trading. But on the day, the trading volume of CCR was about 375,000 ton, and the average price was about 63 yuan. It's about like $10 US. And the series of regulations were published in last year, especially during the October and November, including the management regulations of the voluntary carbon market and also four methodologies, namely the afforestation, mangrove, grid-connected solar thermal power generation, and grid-connected offshore wind power generation. And also there is like allowances, in the management decree of the national ETS, there is a section saying that it allows the key emitting entities can purchase the registered and certified GHG emission reductions for offsetting certain percentage of the verified emission reduction, which means the key emission entities can utilize in CCER for fulfilling their compliance purpose. For now, the allowances is like they're allowing is 5% of the offsetting on the CCR national on the national ETS. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Hongmin, for the interesting insights. And I'm always amazed by the the order of magnitude of any change concerning the Chinese national ETS. I mean, for reference, you just mentioned that covered entities will be able to use CCRs for up to 5% of the compliance obligation. But if you do a quick back of the envelope calculation, 5% of the Chinese national ETS cap is roughly 200 to 250 million, which would be the potential annual demand for CCR credits, right? If all entities meet their quota. And that is roughly equivalent to the global volume of retirement of carbon credits of last year across compliance and voluntary uses, meaning that that single decision in China could single-handedly double the demand for credits globally. But more on that later. On to Okan for a quick also round of updates from Turkey, one of the fastest moving countries out there in the development of new systems. So how is the process going, and what's the latest from the development of the Turkey ETS?
Thank you. Well, 2024 is an intense year for us. We have many things to do, designing, drafting legislation, economic modeling, registered strategy, etc. So I will be speaking as complementary with the items listed in the report. I don't want to repeat again. Some documents, we have some new document. It is Climate Change Mitigation Strategy and Action Plan and it covers 2024 to 2030. And in this plan, chronologically, we are listing our to-do, and in the list, there are some items regarding economic modeling, including benchmark studies, product benchmarks like EU has in free allocation scheme, and also just transition, enlarging the scope, and also some topics regarding voluntary carbon markets, etc. So in the report, you will see we have an MRV system which functions since 2015. So it is a chance for us. So we can use the data and we can describe how will some specific allocation schemes will result in sectoral level or in installation level. So we are making our predictions both in bottom-up approaches and top-down approaches. And also we have another chance. We have participatory networks for our stakeholders, which involve government bodies, private sectors, and sector unions. So those networks are important because during the years of capacity building, we have a common jargon and concepts are well understood during the consultations, and we can easily take decision or take feedbacks regarding some topics. So regarding 2024, we have three main components under the PMI project of World Bank. Well, in next 5 years, we will be benefiting from PMI in various topics. And this also means we will have some procurements according to World Bank rules and procedures. I don't know whether there are consultancy firms here serving in carbon pricing topics. I strongly recommend them follow our procurement announcements, contributing Turkey in her net zero journey. I will put the project webpage link in the chat soon. So regarding the items we will be completing this year, because as indicated in the report, this year our ETS will commence functioning. In the design and legislation item, we are planning to finalize the design parameters of Turkish emission trading system. So far, we have conducted many stakeholder engagement process, and with even an intense schedule, we will be finalizing our parameters of Turkish emission trading system. And simultaneously, economic impacts of the mechanism will be studied, and the results of such studies will support for the decision-making process for the policymakers. For us, such studies should be done regularly in order to manage the effectiveness of the policies in the course of the time. And another topic to be studied this year is having a registered strategy. I know that here we are focusing on compliance mechanisms, especially on ETS. However, you know that carbon pricing is an ecosystem which includes voluntary carbon markets, Article 6 mechanisms of Paris Agreement. So we will be analyzing whether having an integrated register strategy for all needs, and we will be evaluating here. So, well, maybe the most important thing regarding our agenda is the climate law. We are expecting the Turkish Parliament will make it this year. So in the climate law, we will be defining the very basics of the emission trading system as well, besides other topics. So, well, maybe one of the most important element of our design is having a board mechanism. So it will ensure the policy coordination among other policy priorities like energy, well, protecting consumers, just transition, etc. So having a carbon market board will help us to ensure the policy coordination and harmony. And also we will be having an advisory committee which consists of private sector, and also we will be listening them their views. And also we will be defining in our climate law the status of allowances, because it will affect the all system design. So defining the legal status of allowances, and accordingly division of labor between institutions. And also punishments will be defined with basic terms, and also the main documents, annual main documents will be allocation plans, national allocation plans. So we are planning to announce it in a transparent way and ensure that participants will have enough time to prepare. And supervisory framework, pilot phase provisions, and also introduction, the GHG permit will be some features from the climate law of us. So I will stop here and I will share some links in the chat. If there are more questions, I gladly answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Okan, for the great update, and also congratulations to you and colleagues on pushing forward the development of the Turkey ETS. I'm getting to the Q&A now as a final round of panel discussion, and I see that some of you have their hand up. Unfortunately, we're not able to give you the floor, so please put your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar. Starting from the good set of questions that we collected already, it's probably worth tackling the elephant in the room first, and we'll start with a quick reflection on CBAM. So merging together a few different questions, and also speaking from the perspective of where you sit on the CBAM fence. I wanted to ask Ruben, what's your take on how CBAM has been perceived, and what kind of reactions you're getting so far, and perhaps we can also use this as an opportunity to see how this relates with the task force that you also talked about, given that we have a question about that as well. To Amira, I will ask you if New Zealand is also looking at border adjustments as a possible alternative form to free allocation for leakage protection. And Hongmin and Okan, I'll ask you how CBAM was perceived back home, and what your impressions are so far, and whether that had an impact in the way the Chinese and the Turkish systems are shaping up. But let's go to Ruben first.
Thank you, Stefano. Maybe to first answer the question I think that Marta asked, do you see any link between the development of more ETSs around the world and the CBAM? We didn't do any research on that, so I only have anecdotal evidence, and that is, of course, there's much more interest in that we hear, at least from countries that say we see that we can get a CBAM discount, or that our products can get a CBAM discount if they have paid a carbon price at home. So rather than paying it to you at the border, maybe we can collect the revenues ourselves. How should we design our emissions trading system or carbon tax in order to qualify for such a discount? That is a question we get a lot. So I definitely do think that CBAM plays a role in that trend. But I would think it's more important what our Turkish colleague Okan said. I would think most countries are inspired by the need for effective climate policies and effective climate change measures, and I think carbon pricing is one of the instruments that really proves to work reliably to bring emissions down. In terms of reactions, your question, Stefano, from the rest of the world, I think we have been seeing sort of a change over time from questioning the measure as such and having to explain it and explain that it is not a protectionist measure, that is an environmental measure, that Europeans will be worse off than third countries. I think that has helped a lot in explaining it. Now, I think we're moving more into a situation whereby the system is there, and so questions have become much more administrative. So how can we deal with this system in practice? And the colleagues of DG Taxud are in charge. I think that's also the answer on the task force. The task force would really focus on the carbon pricing questions, and not on the CBAM questions. Of course, the two teams will work together. The task force doesn't exist yet. There is only an acting head of unit who has just been appointed, Sebastian Paco, and he is now recruiting his team. I see in the chat the question, only 10 people. For us, 10 people is really a lot. So we have 20 people working on the ETS, at least the core unit, and then another unit working on the implementation of the ETS. So 10 is a substantial addition to our staff, and so we're happy with it. But we also have high expectations from them. I think those are the questions. But if I missed any, then let me know.
No, that was a great overview. Thank you. Amira, how is New Zealand looking at border adjustment measures?
Thank you. So yeah, as you mentioned, we've got industrial allocation, so free allocation for these relevant sectors. The government has been trying to understand and sort of exploring alternatives to industrial allocation, such as a carbon border adjustment. It was a particular act in the emissions reduction plan for New Zealand's first emissions budget, so the emissions reduction plan that was released in 2022, and the idea was to initially sort of focus on the case in the cement industry, because that was a pretty perfect example of there's one firm producing cement domestically in New Zealand, and then another big firm that previously produced domestically but switched to an import model. And so a number of conversations were sort of had with those industries about how it's sort of working and how the sort of the issues play out, and what something helpful might look like. And then also sort of separate from conversations with the relevant industry, exploring some of those key questions about how it would work. So we have looked with great interest at the EU model and how they've tried to these quite tricky questions. The more we learned about what a carbon border adjustment mechanism might look like, the less simple it seems to be. But so I guess in short, it's very much been at the investigation stages.
Thank you. Let's go on to Hongmin now to see what how CBAM was received in China.
first of all, I would like to say from my perspective, I believe the CBAM, it's actually EU is really the practitioner on advocating for the like a global ETS, which is the CBAM actually is the start or really the first mechanism that trying to linking the different ETS systems, which is can really make, I mean, maybe the original purpose is not this, but the effect of it's like to can help to linking the different ETS systems, no matter through offsets or the trying to making the design a little bit similar for future linkage. This is I believe the CBAM could do, but the reality is like what the design of the CBAM is. We are considering like if by our researchers for CBAM, we would like to say it's not should be only subject to paying the fees for like the allowances by other countries, but also actually should be encouraging the other countries to reduce the emissions, no matter how the approach it is. So actually in China, it's the same thing. I think this global observation is like every country is really the CBAM is really the hot topic for now. Every country is trying to understand what the CBAM is trying to do, and they're doing the internal research. This is also China. What is China doing? It's like to understand what the CBAM impacts, what the reaction of the CBAM is. So for now, I believe the carbon market expansion is also helping to address the CBAM and help, especially for the currently CBAM covered sectors like the iron and steel, maybe potential chemicals. So I think the for China's reaction on the CBAM would be expanding to other sectors would be really the first step. Thank you.
Thanks, Hongbin, and Okan, over to you.
Well, ideally, I guess that ICAP would recommend a single global carbon pricing scheme rather than explosion of number of CBAMs. But ideally, it will be the case. But in realistic terms, yeah, Turkey is a trading partner of EU, and well, actually, it is more than 40% of in monetary terms. Exports go to Europe, and good amount of them are CBAM products. So, well, it's an issue in Turkey, as many participants guess. So, well, yes, it is an impetus for many countries like Turkey. Having a national pricing mechanism is good in terms of pricing, and afterwards having a supportive mechanism with the revenues or other mechanisms to the installations and sectors. So it is an impetus. We cannot deny it. Well, but we will see. It is not easy, but still they seem applicable for products. But in the case of services like travel by airlines, carbon leakages seem too impossible to prevent. Maybe some of you aware of the debate on pricing the aviation emissions. So we will see, but it is undeniable. Yes, it is an impetus globally, having more and more CBAMs.
Thank you, Okan. And I'm conscious that we are over time already, but if you bear with me, I also want to do a super quick last round of 20 seconds to each one of you, asking about whether and how your jurisdiction is looking at the use of offset credits in the system, either domestic or international. Because again, we've got many questions about that, and it is one topic that always comes up. So starting from Ruben.
Yeah, I can be even quicker than 20 seconds. The answer is no. So we're not looking into that at all. I can imagine at some point it becomes a more topical discussion as the cap declines and smaller and smaller residual emissions in the system. Now that I have the word, and I know you gave me 20 seconds, I said before, I want to correct myself. I said that the EU businesses will be worse off with CBAM. That's, of course, a much too general and not nuanced enough statement. What I was referring to is the fact that CBAM revenues that we intend to collect at the border will be around 1 billion, and the value of the free allocation that we will phase out is around 7 billion according to our impact assessment. So that gives you an idea of the impact of the CBAM on the EU as opposed to the rest of the world. So I wanted to nuance that. I hope that's fine.
Thanks for the clarification. Amira.
Thank you. So in terms of offsets in New Zealand, so yes, we already allow domestic offsets via forestry's inclusion in the New Zealand ETS. In terms of international, there's nothing active at the moment. If it's sort of international offsets via something like linking to other ETSs, like this is something that I believe New Zealand has thought about in the past, and consider that there may be a case for it in the future.
Thank you. And Hongmin, you already spoke to the CCRs, but anything you want to add on that front? And just to clarify, CCRs are purely domestic at this stage, right?
Yeah. So I would like to say your question about the total offsetting credits amount allowed for the national carbon market. You were thinking about the 225 million tons. I think that was theoretically the demand analysis numbers is not actually the supply, and we can see we need to consider what's the actual demand and also the available supply. We have to keep in mind that for the just started this January, the new CCR system, there's only 4 type of methodologies are available, and there's no actual credits are generated and issued from the new system. So there's definitely no such big amount of the available CCRs. And also in the future, I believe there's a lot of other requirements on the vintage years and the qualities. So from the supply and demand side, the government is really trying to looking at the high quality of the CCR offsetting. And in addition to that, actually the CCR is not only the supply for the national ETS, but it is also for the voluntary emission reduction activities like the net zero activities by the companies or the big events that holds in China, like Olympics or other international events. They can use the CCR for offsetting or reaching the zero emission events for that part. So this is also the consumption, also the demand side for the CCRs. It's not only towards the large amount of you were mentioned the theoretical demands. So I want to mention this. Thank you.
Thanks for the additional context. And do you think that having a demand level that is not met by domestic supply might prompt calls to open the system to international credits?
For now, it's not open to the internationals, but in the management decree, there is a clause to saying for the further international utilization of the CCR, it will subject to the additional regulations or policies. But whether other international programs can be used towards Chinese domestic usage, that will subject to the there's a sort of a question mark, because we believe regarding to that definitely previous regarding the CDM, the Kyoto Protocol period, China definitely the big seller. But in the future, a lot of research are already showing China may not be the big supplier or big seller, but also potentially would be the buyers.
Thank you. Really interesting. And Okan, I know it might be early days, but what's the latest thinking on the use of offset credits in the Turkish ETS?
Well, yeah, we are considering it, but seemingly, well, it is not a decided thing, but in our pilot phase, the system will flexible enough. So we are concerning that offsets can have an effect on prices. We don't want to prices become so low. So even if we are planning some volume-based price stability mechanisms, we are concerning in the beginning phases of the offsets regarding the prices. So I think, but maybe in the next phases, offsets will be mainstream. But well, in the diagrams also, Lewis showed us some jurisdictions allow 100% offsetting. Well, California use 4%. So I think Turkish system will not be like 100. It may be 4 or 5% can be allowed in this regard. But for the pilot phase, for now, we don't think.
Thank you. And thank you all for the excellent discussion. I'm afraid we need to bring this event towards a close, even though discussing these topics with you was quite enjoyable, but we are over time already. Before I close the webinar, I wanted to say a big thank you to the four of you. So thank you, Okan, Amira, Hongming, and Ruben for the great discussion and for being such excellent panelists. Big thanks to Anastasia and Lewis for the great presentations, and obviously big thanks and appreciation to the broader ICAP team for the great work on this report. Last but not least, I also wanted to thank the ICAP members who are patient enough to send us the information and data that makes the report production possible. And big thanks to the German government who is supporting the work of ICAP and the production of the status report specifically. Thank you also to all of you for bearing with us over the last 1 hour and a half plus. It was an interesting discussion. Again, you will be able to find the recording, the presentation, the actual report on our website. Keep an eye out for up and coming communications from ICAP. As I said, we will be launching a podcast next week and a newly updated allowance price explorer, which will also feature auction revenue data in a few weeks from now. Last but not least, if you happen to be at the European Climate Summit in Florence next week, you can catch Lewis there. We will be hosting a side event to do yet again another in-person launch of the status report, and we will have some expert and panelists there as well to discuss some of the key trends and developments. With that, we'll close the webinar, but thanks again for joining us, and we'll be in touch soon. Have a nice rest of your day. See you soon.